how many chapters?
18.
18 chapters, yes. And of the middle 6, which chapter is considered the most important?
Chapter 9.
Chapter 9, which is entitled
The Most Confidential Knowledge.
Getting this Bible knowledge. Yeah, the most confidential knowledge. And it's quite interesting because Vishnu Chakravarti he explains that chapter 2 and 3 are considered Guhya, which means confidential. But chapter 7 and 8 are considered more confidential. He calls them Guhyatara. Chapter 2 and 3 are considered confidential because it reveals knowledge about the difference between the body and the soul, and it hints about liberation. Chapter 7 and 8 are considered more confidential because it speaks about the knowledge of the Absolute Truth and attainment of the Supreme. But chapter 9 he calls Guhyatamam, which is the most confidential. Also in our brahmachari classes we're learning the first verse of the 9th chapter, and it's a verse spoken by Krishna. Idam tute Guhyatamam Parakshya Anusuyave Jnanam Vijnanam Sahitam Yach Gyantva Mukshasya Shubhat. It's explained that Krishna is saying to Arjuna, because you are not envious, I am going to explain this most confidential knowledge and realization, knowing which you be relieved of all material miseries. So, very clearly, this chapter 9 is considered the most confidential verse. And there's a particular reason why it's considered the most confidential verse. Because it explains the intimate relationship that Krishna has with his devotees. So, if you imagine it, of the Vedas, Bhagavad Gita is considered the essence. And of the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9 is considered the essence. And it specifically deals with this topic about the dealings between Krishna and his devotees. So we can understand that from this logic, that the most important aspect of the Vedas is this feature. This feature of the Lord is Bhaktivatsal, his dealings with his devotees. And we see this more elaborately explained in Srimad Bhagavatam. Like one devotee was giving an analogy, was explaining that, like in law, you have a law book which outlines in principle the laws. But more detail is given in other books which have case studies, giving examples of those laws. So Bhagavad Gita in one sense can be taken as a law book. And the case studies could be taken as Srimad Bhagavatam. Because there are very elaborate and detailed descriptions of how the Lord interacts with his devotees. And basically this entire chapter looks at this topic. But I want to kind of look at two particular verses that perhaps show this quality of the Lord. The first verse is verse 29. Anyone know the verse?
What chapter?
9th chapter. Samaham sarvabhuteshu name dishus dinapriya yavajanti tamam bhaktya mayi teteshu chapiyaham. Now, Baladev Vidyabhushan, he splits this verse into two sections. So the first two lines, the Lord is explaining Samaham sarvabhuteshu, that Sama means equal. So sarvabhuteshu means all living entities. So the Lord is equal to all living entities. And in the next two lines he explains that neither am I envious of anyone, nor am I particularly dear to anyone. So Baladev Vidyabhushan, he explains that these two lines particularly are explaining the Paramatma feature of the Lord. So this is the nature of the super soul. The super soul is neutral. Prabhupada gives the example in the purport, just like rain. And just like rain, when it falls equally. If it falls in London, some areas of London are covered with water, some areas are perhaps covered with buildings, some are covered with grass. Either way, the rain falls equally. So in the same way, the super soul interacts with the jivas, or living entities. Depending on your desire, the Paramatma will reciprocate. But the last two lines, Yavajanti tamam bhaktya mayi teteshu chapiyaham. The Lord is explaining, but for one who is a bhakta or bhaja, he renders worship to me. Then, literally the translation is, I am in him and he is in me. And Prabhupada explains what that means is, I am a friend to him and he is a friend to me. So Baladev Vidyabhushan explains those two lines are is the Bhagavan feature of the Lord. And he elaborates and explains that if a devotee thinks of Krishna, then Krishna thinks of the devotee. If someone becomes an enemy to the devotee, then Krishna becomes also an enemy to that person. Just like we see in the Mahabharata, how the Pandavas were constantly being disturbed and attacked in various ways by the Kauravas, or Duryodhana. As a result, Duryodhana also became Krishna's enemy. So this is the Lord's nature. The Acharyas asked this question, now what if such a devotee has some difficulty? What if he has some, he goes through a difficult period? In the next verse, this is the Lord's response. Apichet sudaracharo bhajate mam ananyabhak sadur eve samantyavya samyaj vyagit sito hisa. It's an interesting verse, very, very interesting. It has a lot of deep meaning. Prabhupada's purport on this verse is very, very extensive and very elaborate. It's explained, apichet sudaracharo. This word duracharo, it comes from the word achar. What does achar mean? It's not big word. Yeah, behavior. So dur achar means bad behavior, yeah. And this word sur is added to this word. And sur, it acts like an intensifier. So literally speaking, it means very bad behavior. And Prabhupada translates this to abominable activities. And this word apichet means even if. So even if one commits abominable activities. Apichet sudarachara bhajate mam ananyabhak. But this devotee is engaged in bhaja or worship or devotion, but it's a certain type of worship. Ananyabhak. What does that mean? Yeah, without deviation. So even if he performs an abominable activity, if he is engaged in undeviating devotional service, sadur eve samantyavya, Krishna says that he should be considered a sadhu. And then it's explained samyaj vyavasito hisa. It's explained that the reason is because he's properly situated in his determination. Now I'm going to go into this, the meaning of this a little bit more, based on what Acharyas say. But before I get into that, there is a warning that we shouldn't misunderstand this verse. And Prabhupada explains this in detail in the purport. Someone may see this verse, which says that if someone is engaged in devotional service and performs an abominable activity, he should be considered a sadhu. So someone may take that verse and commit a sin, fall down and say, hey look, that verse says you should still consider me a sadhu, and keep continually sin. Prabhupada says that this is actually the 7th offense of the holy name that we recite every day, which is to sin on the strength of the holy name. Namna balad yasya hai papa buddhi. It's actually explained that if one commits this particular offense, then even Yamraj can save someone. Now, Prabhupada explains another verse similar to this verse in the Nishinga Purana, in the purport. He explains that sometimes people, they criticize the moon because it has marks on it. You know, someone sees the moon and sees it has spots on it, so they criticize the moon. In India they say there's a rabbit on the moon. I think in the West they say there's a man on the moon. So someone may criticize the moon, but it's explained in the Srimad Purana that it doesn't stop the moon from doing its job. The job of the moon is to diffuse light. So it's an unnecessary criticism. So in the same way, a devotee who's engaged in devotional service, he may accidentally have a fall down. But this shouldn't be considered to be taken too seriously. Now, Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur, he explains a little bit more about this. He starts off, and through this explanation he poses various questions. The first thing